Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to Majlis, a show brought to you by Penny Appeal Australia in partnership with Life Matters Community. Before we start this show, a message from our sponsor.
My name is Kieran O'Halloran. Last Wednesday, the 15th of September, I attended a funeral at Rookwood Cemetery. The funeral was for my best friend's father, who was a victim of COVID. There was quite a traumatic event that transpired at the cemetery as a result of the police's interaction with the mourners who were present. My friend's father was in ICU for 3 weeks. During that time, no one in his immediate family, or any person for that matter, could visit him. So what they wanted to do was attend Rookwood Cemetery, stay in their cars, and pay their respects that way. Now, what happened on that weekend prior? We see all these people at the beach who were not social distancing. They didn't have any masks on. We talk about, a public health order. The public health order just went out the door. So keep that in mind now that all these mourners have just experienced that. They've seen the parallel in the contradictions of the public health orders being applied. And so they attend the funeral on Wednesday. When I drove into Rookwood Cemetery that day, I saw over 20 police cars in the car park, disproportionate amount compared to the mourners who were there. Everyone there had a mask on. There was no congregating. The car park, with some people who had gone out of their cars, there was social distancing taking place, and they were watching from afar. They were not participating in the funeral. What happened is that the police have said to the mourners there that the body is not going to be placed into the grave until every single person gets in their car and disperses. Now, majority of the people there did the right thing and they left. They were very, very traumatized by this whole thing because they couldn't witness the actual funeral itself. Secondly, they felt that the whole funeral for the family, that the police absolutely disrespected that family. One of the great things that gives me a lot of satisfaction was that I feel that when my father passed away, that I gave him a very, very good send-off, a very good farewell. And to this day, we still treasure the way that we buried him and everything that went with it. I look at my friend's family and I think the police owe him an apology. They owe all the families an apology that day because their behavior was disgusting. There was absolutely no reverence shown for the actual cemetery itself. There was no reverence shown for the fact that it was a funeral, and there was no reverence shown to the mourners who were present. The police do not know how to use their discretion in these events, and we see, the events that we see. And I really think that they need to improve their understanding of the area, their understanding of the people they're dealing with, and really just not have this heavy-handedness approach that we are always seeing.
A tale of two cities. Many are using the term to describe the reality of what's happening in Sydney today, with suburbs divided between blue collars and white collars. Postcode discrimination igniting fury amongst the people in Western Sydney, and showing that the government bodies are going to have a lot of patching up to do post-lockdown to regain the trust of the community. Since the start of the lockdown, we have seen many videos and footage of unfair measures from New South Wales Police when it comes to enforcement of COVID-19 restrictions. We definitely feel the heavy presence of police in our neighborhoods, and tensions are rising. So are our suburbs being scapegoated during this pandemic? Is there a double standard when it comes to policing in Western Sydney? What are our rights as citizens living in the 12 LGAs of concern? With me to answer all these questions and more is Ramia Abdo Sultan. Ramia is a founding partner at Lawbridge Lawyers and Consulting. She's a practicing solicitor with over 14 years of legal experience. Ramia is also the Community Relations Advisor for the Australian National Imam Council, ANIC. Salam alaikum, Ramia. Thank you for joining me today.
Walaikum salam. Thank you for the opportunity.
So today is going to be a very interesting episode. I feel like it's a very important topic, and there's been a lot of back and forth from the community, and we're hearing all these, we don't know if it's a rumor, if it's the reality. So I'm hoping that this episode will clear things up. So I'm going to just dive right into it, inshallah.
No, definitely. Look, it's been a very difficult time, very trying times, I think, obviously for all of New South Wales, but in particular for the LGAs of concern. So we have a lot to discuss, I'm sure, and tackle some of the issues that we've seen unfold over the last couple of weeks. It's been quite overwhelming, I think, for everyone.
Yes, subhanAllah. So Ramia, let's start with the basics. What are our rights when it comes to COVID restrictions? As members of the 12 LGAs of concern, is there like a big difference, especially when it comes to mask mandates and all that?
Yep. So look, as lawyers, I'll make a disclaimer out here. The laws have been so fast changing at such a fast pace that even us have found it difficult to keep up with, and at times even difficult to interpret. So it's very important, and this is where the disconnect is, it's very important that the community is kept in sync with the changing laws. So whether it's through Service New South Wales, whether it's through the direct messaging from local MPs and other peoples or other people of power and so forth, it's very important that our community is kept in sync. So generally speaking, and over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a sort of a general sort of, refreshment, I would say, of the COVID laws, where the majority of areas across New South Wales have somewhat began to, experience almost equal, I guess, treatment and law. This is just very, very recent. We've seen that blanket out very recently. However, in the past, obviously, the LGAs of concern that, were noted as having the higher numbers in COVID have had to experience a lot more stricter rules, such as curfews, such as restricted time outside of the house during the day, masks, at all times outdoors. The moment you step outside your home, basically, that you wear it, no visiting and so forth. Generally speaking, the laws are quite similar across all of New South Wales. However, excluding obviously rural areas, but the 8 LGAs have undoubtedly had to experience a little bit more, restrictions because of the numbers that we're seeing branch out throughout these particular suburbs.
Yeah. So was the law broken on that warm Saturday, September 11th, by beachgoers in Bondi and Coogee? Was there a law breach?
Look, absolutely. And I think, in our conversations directly with police, and this is something that is constantly raised time and time again in meetings with, members of parliament and or police, there is definitely a breach that's happening, and that happened on those particular occasions. That just wasn't, a solo occasion. This was happening quite frequently. However, the enforcement of the law, I would say, differed quite substantially. So we do see a difference in the enforcement of law between, particular suburbs, such as the eastern suburbs, in comparison to the southwestern suburbs. We have seen that happen. Generally speaking, the mask rule applied to most of these areas, right? But from an enforcement perspective, were fines being issued, were arrests being made in the same proportionate measures that we saw happening here? Probably not. And to be quite frank and transparent here, these matters have been raised directly with police authorities and members of parliament, and they will be considered, and accountability will come to the table, as they say, because we have seen a difference in the enforcement of certain laws.
I'm glad you said that, because before our interview, I had a conversation with Southwest Metropolitan Region Commander, Acting Assistant Commissioner Brett McFadden.
And we've had to ask not only the Fairfield community, but now the Southwest community, the western suburbs, we've really had to ask them to do a lot. And what we've asked for them to do is for their safety. And I can see that, and I wanted to get this message really out there early. I acknowledge and I accept wholeheartedly the difficulties that our communities in Southwest Sydney have experienced. We have a lot of communities that place a lot of value and importance on family, and our extended families, our grandparents, our brothers, our sisters, our cousins, and our extended family who we embrace with no necessarily genetic connection. It's about who we see ourselves as and who we're connected with. And one of the things this public health order has required us to do is to go against our natural instincts to be around family. And it's one of the hardest things to do. I'm separated from my family. I can't see my sons. I can't see my parents. So when it comes to the question you originally asked was about double standards. Unfortunately, our communities in the southwest Sydney have bore the brunt of the impact, and we needed to start to work with the communities very early on in the piece to say, well, we've got to get you to work against what you would naturally do. That support that you would provide to your families, that assistance you would provide to your neighbour or your community member, we can't actually do that at the moment because we risk making people unsafe and giving them the virus. And it is such a hard thing to do. So unfortunately, that's a situation we're placed in. More recently, and in the last couple of months, or probably in the last month particularly, it would have been around about the 16th of August where we started a really strong enforcement phase of what our policing response was. It's in response to the public health orders and the health advice saying that we're losing control of this virus. It's going to impact on the community far greater than we anticipated. And again, our communities in southwest Sydney were greatly affected by it, and we needed to take a strong position. I equate it to almost like a tough love principle where we needed to take a really strong position to make sure that the communities were safe in what they were doing. We then, at the same time, we were promoting the vaccination rate, the COVID testing, and you would have heard the Premier on numerous occasions call out the southwest Sydney communities for standing up and meeting the challenge of getting COVID tested initially and then getting vaccinated rates up. And we've done a lot of good work together in doing that. So I can understand the perceptions, I really can. Unfortunately, the public health order does have 12 affected areas, and those 12 affected areas do have different conditions on which we need to operate on. And they are different from those images we see in some areas of the beaches area. And I can understand the frustration that goes with that, but it comes back to the reality it's based on health advice. The positive thing that I see moving forward is the conditions are starting to be relaxed and we're starting to get a balance in the conditions that the communities are experiencing. And I think that's going to be for the betterment of everybody.
Yes. So it's important that you actually stated that our LGAs have different rules. But when it comes to the mask mandates, I actually checked the government website and it clearly states that according to New South Wales government, one can remove the mask when doing exercise. In our 12 LGAs of concern, masks can be removed if you are doing strenuous exercise. But in other areas of the state, a mask can be removed if doing other types of physical exercise. But the pictures that emerged in the news outlets and media and social media showed people sunbaking, and that doesn't classify as exercise. So that's why the frustration, you can imagine the frustration in the communities. And
I can do that, but in other areas of the state too, there's also an issue about recreation. And the word recreation in its most English
very broad.
Its most English definition of our interpretation is anything that's not work. And it does create, and I think you've hit the total agree, it creates a real frustration for those that are doing their best each and every day, and they see that people who are living in other circumstances under other conditions are doing something that's different. And I think that's frustration. But it's also, we're a community not only to just about masks, it's a community that it's been impacted on our work, it's about our social connection, it's about our schooling for our children. Everything's been impacted, and this is just another layer of frustration that's placed upon it. So I really understand the concerns of our community.
There's a lot to unpack here, and I'll try to unpack a few parts of the comments that he's noted. So first and foremost, and it's really important that we do acknowledge that yes, the police are doing their job. So they receive the health orders or the laws, then it's their job to, in a sense, try to interpret those laws to the best of their abilities and then enforce them. Now, as we've seen with the events that have unfolded over the last couple of weeks, the interpretation of the laws is very difficult. As I've said, as lawyers as well, we found it very difficult to interpret the laws. It's very discretional. They're very, circumstantial as well. So as you noted, the word strenuous. I mean, walking for me could potentially be strenuous, whereas it could be normal for someone else.
Yeah.
Running could be normal for me, but strenuous for someone else. So it's open to interpretation. That's one issue. The second issue is, look, the points that he's raised in terms of the community, mindset around visiting and family and so forth, I completely agree with, and I acknowledge that sentiment. Reason being is because I know firsthand that, unfortunately, and not to say that this has not been happening in areas outside of the 12 LGAs, but I'm talking about what I'm seeing and what I'm interacting with. There has been a lack of compliance. I can tell you firsthand of interactions that I've had with people directly who will acknowledge and say outright, we are still visiting, we are still going out, we are still, going to the parks and so forth. And as you have seen this time round, COVID has hit our community in a way like never before. We know of someone at least who's either caught COVID and or is potentially in ICU and or has passed from the disease. So this time round, and I think the reason why there's been a need for a, pretty much heavy-handed enforcement is because, unfortunately, there has been an element of lack of compliance compared to last year's lockdown. Unfortunately, we've seen that. I think last year people were very scared, whether there were questions around, does COVID exist, does it not exist? It was still in its, early stages, but people followed the rules. This time around, we haven't seen that. And I know this firsthand, and I will share with you some stories which are mind-blowing in terms of lack of compliance, which is quite sad. The other thing is that most of the transmissions I know firsthand here in the southwestern Sydney areas have been happening within the homes. So home transmission, which says a lot. It means that, look, there's something happening here. And again, health orders don't come just from, a magic fairy outside of the universe. They come from, data, statistics, information, contact tracing, and so forth. So there's clear indication that, hey, look, there's something going on here. We need to do something about it. So at all not justifying the heavy-handed or disproportionate, if you want to call it, police powers that have been applied, but at the same time, there has been a heavy-handed approach because, unfortunately, there has been a lack of compliance, not by all, but by some members of the community.
It's very important to highlight. Actually, when I started the conversation, I'm pretty sure this is like the fringe of society, like what happens, like when people don't, the police actually are always, unfortunately, they're trying to enforce the law, and they are in situations where someone is not abiding by the law, but the majority of people are following the rules. And I have many examples as well of people following the rules. But as you said, for our communities as well, it's a cultural thing where we have to see our parents. We're all connected. Cousins are always together. It's a different dynamic.
Definitely. And just to highlight, and I think, Commander McFadden actually raised it, it's not an exclusively Muslim issue. We're talking, the Southwest is heavily multicultural, right? Yes. Heavily, it's a heavily multicultural, community. And most of the communities put emphasis on family and the importance of family ties and connections and so forth. So I don't at all want us to think that this is, I'm talking, potentially Muslim community because they're my community and I interact with them the most. But this is across the board. There are a lot of other communities who are also experiencing the same thing because we share the same values in terms of family and so forth.
So let's talk about the Rookwood Cemetery incidents on September 16th. Were the police simply following the public health order? Because I asked the Assistant Commissioner McFadden about this, and I'm going to show you what he had to say. But I feel sometimes, like what we saw on the beaches of Coogee, Bondi, sometimes the police have their own discretion, their own personal judgment when it comes to situations of rendering whether something is dangerous, like danger for the public health or not. And we saw images and footage of, people just sitting in the car trying to observe the burial of their loved ones, and that in and by itself, we felt like there's a lack of empathy when it comes to one of the hardest moments in someone's life, seeing a loved one being buried.
Prior to the pandemic, we've always had relationships, and from time to time there's issues that come up in our community that test the quality of those relationships and test our connection. And it is always being able to talk through these challenges that it comes forward. One of the positive things I want to be able to really affirm today, the challenges at Rookwood, from my independent looking at the issues at Rookwood, police managed the situation appropriately. However, they were acting in line with a public health order and an escalation of a few number of individuals. However, what it did bring to the fore was a number of concerns, not dissimilar to what you're raising today, about, is there any further scope of consideration? And so last week I had some discussions with a number of community leaders. I provided that feedback as an undertaking. I provided them through to my Deputy Commissioner, who's engaged, which is Deputy Commissioner Lanyon, who engaged further with community leaders on Sunday. What we've put in place, listening to the community and understanding these really important, like the burial, the interments, it's the final process where families get to share the loss and to share the grief. And we put a more considered framework around how we would respond to those incidents in the future. There are still public health orders in place, but our connection with the community leaders, our connection with the site managers at the cemeteries, our connection with the funeral homes and the directors is much more considered. And our inspectors are taking the lead into looking what, if any, is the nature of a response we will have at outdoor funerals in the future. And I think the important thing is the public health order still exists, but we're trying to get community leaders, we're trying to get cemetery managers and funeral directors to actually self-manage and self-regulate. The community is going to be required to go into a more self-managed environment in the future. You hear the media reports, you hear the Premier talking about, the 18th of October or thereabouts, where the double vaccination numbers will kick in and some opportunities for the community to move back towards more freedom in their discussions and interactions.
Yep.
But equally, we still need to keep our families safe, and so we need to make sure that there is that due diligence in that self-management of whatever the health orders are at the time. So I'm happy that we were able to listen to your community members and concerns about outdoor burials and interments, and we've taken steps to make sure that there's a more balanced consideration of that, the empathy that you so rightly highlighted.
So look, there has been a lot of conversation and engagement with police, and these issues were actually raised through the ANI platform with police. That in fact a letter was sent out shortly after that Rookwood Cemetery incident, highlighting, I guess, three key issues: the disproportionate policing powers, the lack of, consistent messaging from the Commissioner or the police authorities and so forth, and discrimination in law enforcement. So those three issues were actually raised. And as a backdrop to that, and to build on what Commissioner McFadden said, yes, there have been, potential plans on their part to apply what we call a community approach in policing. So when we look at the span of the last, 2 decades or so forth, the community's come a long way, particularly in their engagement with police and authorities and so forth. There's been an open working relationship with authorities to ensure that, we're able to resolve issues and not escalate them in matters where they can be contained. And I felt, subhanAllah, that COVID hit and then it's just completely reversed all that. And there's a lot of damage, control that's having to be taken now, and we're trying to salvage that relationship. So look, the Rookwood Cemetery incident, but as highlighted, the majority, and this will not be captured on your amateur social media, footage and so forth that's taken, the majority of people were doing the right thing. The majority of people who were told you are to leave and disperse followed the rules, but that wasn't presented to the community. Unfortunately, there was one side, and that was, look, we are, this is, this group's being targeted, and it was only 4 people in the end that refused to follow the advice. Now, police have a responsibility to ensure that they de-escalate situations, so they're not provocative, they're not, making things worse than what they already are. But if you feel, if we see a situation or scenario where there's resistance, where there's a lack of submission or surrender when it comes to authority coming to question you and so forth, well, of course, you're going to see consequences. So we always say, if you are approached by police, cooperate. Even if you've done the wrong thing, cooperate. Yeah. Don't go on the defensive. Answer questions, take the fine, and then go and deal with it. Get legal advice, or if there was actual misconduct on the police's part in terms of their behaviour and dealing with you, put in a formal complaint to the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission and let things happen in the way that they should be. But going on a frantic, on social media and showing people that, look, I've been oppressed, is not going to solve your issues at all.
Yeah. Do you think there should be like an education in terms of that with our community? Because I feel every time I actually see it unfold in a video, I'm like, why don't you just give them your ID and then say, I object that because I wasn't doing anything wrong, or just state your rights to the police officer and say, I'm going to file a complaint about this because this is, and tape it and make a video about it, but don't be aggressive, because I feel like if the aggression actually triggers ego on both sides, and it becomes like, it escalates the situation where we're like trying to prove power, and in the end, there's a rule of law, and the way that things work is that the police are the ones that are enforcing the law in terms of COVID restrictions, and we have to deal with that. So what I feel is like, maybe there should be like some kind of talk in the community of how to deal with it. And this is why I'm actually bringing you on board, because you do have the law background. So what do you think if let's say there's an altercation, and let's say someone is not wearing a mask, but they have a valid excuse, they have a paper from their GP that says they can't wear it for some reason, for medical issues, and a police officer approaches them and tells them, where's your mask? What should they say? This podcast is brought to you by Penny Appeal Australia.
There should be cooperation, right? That's the key. When, yes, absolutely, as Australian citizens, we are afforded, it's a blessing, in fact, a multitude of rights. We have a lot of rights. But when a police officer, particularly in this climate, in the application of, health orders and so forth, comes up to you and says, why are you not wearing a mask? If you're going to put on I don't have to, it's a free country type of response, of course you're going to see a negative response or dealing with the scenario, as opposed to, if you are approached, if you have a valid excuse, submit it and show it, because that is what you are supposed to do. If you don't have a valid excuse on you and evidence to support that, and you're doing the wrong thing, as in you've actually breached an order, take your fine quietly and go deal with it in the way that you would deal with a normal parking ticket or a normal fine issued on a speed fine, or red light camera fine, or whatever it is. So the point is, you need to show cooperation. You need to then understand that if in the event you have not been treated in the way that you should be treated, let's say, in terms of conduct and so forth, there are avenues to take, and we heavily advise that you take these avenues. And in fact, Annex raised, in terms of raising awareness, multiple fact sheets, multiple, information sessions have gone out as to what to do if you are, pulled over or asked by police in terms of where you're going and so forth. And recently, Annex actually launched a police incident report, because we encourage, and not because we are anti-authority. That's actually the opposite. What we're telling people is comply to the rules and follow the law and follow the orders. At the same time, if at all you have been a victim of police misconduct or excessive force, whatever it is, you have avenues. And that avenue, one of them is because we feel like people are reluctant to maybe pursue their rights through the legal platforms. Submit your incident at least on the ANIC incident report platform, which we've launched recently, and I can share the details with you, Janice, so you can release. at least that way, if there is a need to follow up on those issues, we will do it on the community's behalf. So we understand completely that there are some, there's trauma also associated between a lot of community members and authority. And we want to voice those concerns when we have to. So by all means, do not feel like if you have been mistreated that you should not speak up. You should speak up, but in the right way and on the right platform. But having a rant on video and having that go viral is not going to solve or resolve the issues. It's going to make it worse for you and your community. And just to build on that, sorry, don't forget you have young children bystanders watching your behavior as an adult, because these responses aren't always by young, the youth or teenagers. A lot of them are actually by grown adults, and it's embarrassing to see your child standing there on the sideline watching how it is that you respond to police or to anyone for that matter. So, just remain composed. I understand that there are definitely police out there, and this is why we have this reporting mechanism. There are police out there doing the wrong thing. The majority are doing the right thing, but there are some doing the wrong thing. And you have the right to hold them to account, but you just need to do it in the right way.
And how do you think lodging the report through ANIC would help? Is there a certain avenue? Where would these reports go, and how would you deal with it in terms of with the law enforcement?
It's okay. So if we find that they are significant, and based on the data that we receive, if the victim wants to take action, then we will pursue it and we will direct them as to what the next steps are. The best platform after this would be to lodge a formal complaint with the LECC, the Law Enforcement Conduct Commission, which holds police to account on any bad conduct, basically. If it's a very serious issue, we will take it up directly with people at the top, whether it's the commissioner themselves, the minister for police. In fact, we had meetings recently with the minister for police and the deputy commissioner, and they gave us their personal contact numbers, because they have made it very clear that if there is any serious misconduct on the police's part that your community wants to report on or hold those particular individuals to account, we need to know about it. So basically, we are just a bridge between community and police, and we want to ensure that the community understands that they do also have rights. Yes, they have responsibilities, comply, follow the orders, follow the rules, but at the same time, you're not forfeiting your rights. You absolutely have rights.
So basically, these reports actually do reach if there's enough evidence to actually show that there has been a discrimination or breaching of any laws, then you would definitely take it up. And what happened exactly with the minister when you did that meeting? Because I saw the tweet about it.
Yeah, so look, definitely these reports, so depending on the victim and the reporting that they've put through, the report that they've put through, if they want to pursue it, it's definitely something that we will assist and facilitate. If it's merely just almost data collection, so that we, at least when we have these meetings and engagements with, people, individuals and ministers and so forth, and the commissioners, we have something to actually support the arguments that we're raising. We're not just talking out of thin air, we're actually providing the stats and data to show that, hey, look, this is actually happening. We're not making it up, and we've got the proof to show you. So that's that. In terms of the recent meeting, and we will be, I think ANIC's released a few things on that. There was a joint letter that was written by multiple organisations across Sydney, in particular from the 12 LGAs, addressed to the Premier, addressed to Brad Hazzard, David Elliott, who's the Minister for Police, and Commissioner Fuller, who's the Police Commissioner for New South Wales, raising those key issues. So in terms of, the disproportionate policing powers, the discrimination in law enforcement, and the mixed messaging that the Police Commissioner is putting out there. And in the end, the particular Minister for Police, David Elliott, was extremely cooperative, and he actually grew up in Bankstown, so he understands the the stigma that comes with being in these areas, if you want to call it that. Was fully on board to ensure that the community's concerns are addressed, that police actually need to step up. As you've used this platform, for example, Jana, to raise awareness. What we've noticed is that when the police, let's say, stuff up, as community leaders, we feel like we have to go out there and calm the community down and tell them, no, this is what happened. This is not what they meant to do and whatever. So what we put to the minister was, why can't you come up and voice your response directly to the community, whether it's by statement, whether it's by video. And I remember only a few weeks ago when the ADF, the Defence Force, supposedly was to come out to the LGAs. And he also had a meeting with the head of the ADF at the time and ensured that a video was to be released to calm the community down. And that was very well received. So sometimes there's just a lack of communication. So the community doesn't understand. They only see one side, and that one side is, oh my God, people in our community getting arrested and fined and attacked by the police, but they're not hearing the other side. So I think the messaging that needs to come out from police has to come out very strong and very soon, because, as I said, that relationship is on a fine hair at the moment, and we need to salvage that relationship. The last thing we want is our youth to lack the trust that's been reinstated in authorities over the last couple of years. I mean, we've seen that years ago, and what the consequences of that is.
Yeah. Do you actually feel that when the community leaders, I see the comments when community leaders come out and say, the police, and they try to actually patch up the relationship and the quality of the relationship with the police, you see the community really attacking that. Why are you on their side? So I feel the community has, like you said, the relationship is very volatile at the moment. How would you approach the community when there's that lack of trust when you talk from the other side? Are we supposed to not talk about it? Should they talk about it? Do you feel like there's a different way that we can approach it from a different angle so that people, because even now I'm putting this episode out there while I'm asking the commissioner, I was like, I'm trying to keep my unbiased approach of just asking the right questions, asking the questions of the community, but at the same time, I have no opinion. I need to get the opinion of the other side and get the opinion of the community. But at the same time, I'm scared. I'm like, okay, but what if someone thinks that I'm on the side of this or on the side of that? I'm actually literally just trying as a member of the community to understand this situation and the events that are unfolding, and the videos are reaching me as well. So I received the video and I have to analyze it myself. So how do you think we should tackle it in a way where we're sensitive to both parties?
Yep. Look, community leaders will always bear the brunt of both sides, unfortunately. Yep. And even though we are trying to, offer and provide a balanced approach in that we are proactive and taking active measures in voicing the concerns of the community, both verbally and in written form, but at the same time, bringing to light the other side, which is the police. We're still going to bear the brunt of as I call them, the haters or the criticizers, and that's completely fine. But what we want to ensure, and look, I was born and raised here, and I still, I deal with police all the time in my work, but subhanAllah, there's an element of, it's almost psychological. When you see a police officer, there's this element of fear automatically.
Yeah. When they pull me over, I'm like, I just get jitters.
And I can tell you that they're general. I mean, you met and sat with some police commissioner yesterday, and was completely approachable and fine. And the majority are. But there is this perception, and it's innate. It's almost inevitable to have that perception that police are scary figures, and we do use that unfortunately with our children, which is not a good thing. We need to reverse that. So there is just an innate feeling and perception that police are unapproachable. You need to put your head down, shut up, and say, "Yep. Yes, sir," and that's it. Well, no, that's not the case. As long as there's respect, as long as there's obviously, tolerance and understanding in your interaction with police. If in the event that you are mistreated in any way, we need to now start to speak up. That's where the community is at fault, in that we cop it all and we bear it all and we complain about it to A, B, and C and whinge. But where is the data? How far have we pushed it in terms of complaints against police? And this is what we are advocating for. We need to have a channel. We need to channel our frustrations into something good and positive and legal, right? We don't want to do anything illegal. We don't want another Cronulla riots or whatever. We want to do and vent our frustration in a legal and just manner. And there are many platforms, but unfortunately the community is not reluctant, maybe unaware, sometimes not bothered. What is my issue going to do to change things? I'll just cop it and that's it. But no, as you know, the theory is that, you know, a fly can't bring down an elephant, but when that fly keeps pestering that elephant, it will come down. And we're not at all saying we want to bring police down. Absolutely not. What we are saying is people need to understand that you have a responsibility to be a law-abiding citizen, but you also have a right, and that needs to be balanced.
And as you said, if you actually, it might take a long time if you just file a report and wait for the answers or whatever. But in the end, if it piles up and there is an actual case there, it reaches places better. We need to be organized in that sense.
That's right. And look, it goes to everything. I mean, this right now the focus is on police powers because that's, you know, the topic of the century now. But when we talk about reporting, I mean, Islamophobia is a perfect example. You know, we experience and we're victims of Islamophobia, but we don't bother reporting it. So when we go to speak to members of parliament and people of authority to raise these concerns with them, we don't have a reference point. We don't have data. We don't have statistics. So we need people to report so that we know what to say when we need to say it.
So let's go back to the incidents and the videos and footage. The Bass Hill Plaza incident. I'm going to show you what the commissioner had to say about that incident. But what do you feel as a lawyer yourself watching the footage, and where the officers really, because, you know, there's the anecdotal, you know, of like, did you see how there's lack of urgency? Do you see how he was handcuffed while the doctor was performing defib and all that? From a law perspective, what unfolded there? Do you think that there was an actual breach of the law and the officers weren't acting urgently?
Look, based on the information that I have, there was a need to escalate instead of de-escalate the situation. And again, we will not know until and if this matter is pursued in the, you know, through the legal framework for us to understand exactly what happened. I don't trust video footage. It can be very, very biased, as you would know. It can be one-sided. There was a lot of escalation on the police's part, which they could have de-escalated. Was there a need to handcuff him while he was on the ground? Probably not, because he was already in a surrendered state. So there are things that police could have done a bit better. Was their response right from the start? You know, it may have been necessary, but they could have done things better, and that's what we need to understand. And what we don't understand at the same time is people on the sideline don't help the situation. So when you've got police trying to deal with the situation, and you've got everyone jumping,
everybody's screaming, on the side.
Of course, the situation is going to escalate. It's not going to get de-escalated. So, look, absolutely, I agree. The police did not do the right thing. You know, at all times. I mean, there were a lot of things that could have been done better, but at the same time, there is also another side to the story.
So you feel like they do have a case, basically, like if they want to pursue.
I would say they do, and if they want to report, you know, conduct, at least definitely pursue it. It's something that they can definitely take up, you know, throughout the legal framework.
As you said, people take footage on their phone, and we saw like the emerging of the footage in Bass Hill of the man who fell unconscious, and he was handcuffed for 4 minutes before the handcuffs were removed while he was unconscious on the ground. What comments do you have on this?
Look, I think the commander at Bankstown has given me a full briefing in relation to that. But again, on the mobile phone footage, I can understand why the concerns of the community were raised. But when I looked at the advice I've got from all the information that's available in the body-worn video that's available, yes, police were there in an enforcement capacity, but the moment the individual dropped, the focus did turn to his welfare, looking at vital signs and what have you. With hindsight, could we have taken the handcuffs off a little bit earlier whilst that medical attention was being provided? Maybe the case, but it's certainly a case that the focus was on looking at the welfare of that man that required our attention. He was taken to hospital. He was checked. There was no ill effects from anything, and then the process that we started was then continued. So unfortunately, circumstances present themselves where we need to balance our responses, but the welfare of the people we have in our custody is paramount.
Just sorry to build up on that, John. I make it very clear, and again, we wouldn't be raising these even on a high-level community leadership position if we didn't think it was an issue. There is definitely a disproportionate enforcement of policing powers. We're seeing that unfold. I'm not at all taking that away, and there is probably also, not probably, definitely a discrimination in the application or enforcement of the laws between certain areas. We're definitely seeing that. I will not take that away from the community. I will not actually say otherwise, but at the same time, it is important to acknowledge and accept that certain individuals, not all, we're talking very small minority of individuals who are approached by police and so forth, are also possibly not doing the right thing. So and don't forget, most of these situations, it's not like when you get a question. I mean, as a lawyer, I have a client come in with a legal inquiry. I have time to think about and strategize my advice and my solution to their problem.
Yes.
Police don't have that, right? So they have a situation, they need to go out there, deal with it, and get it right. So of course there is room, and not taking into account potential, obstacles and issues that get thrown their way or challenges. Again, not justifying. I mean, they do need to be trained. They need to understand the cultural complexities of certain people that they're dealing with and so forth. But at the same time, a lot of their responses are very quick, right? They don't have time to think. So like McFadden actually said, yes, they could have done things better. And in hindsight, and this is where things are very important to acknowledge, in our meetings with police, we've made it very clear to police, what we want, look, apologise if you feel like anyone within the police force has done something wrong. Say sorry, it's okay. An acknowledgement of our pain. I think it's very important to acknowledge that, hey, look, there are some people within the police force that are not doing the right thing, and I'm sorry for that. And we are taking it up with in the right way that we're supposed to. But
Yes.
to ignore it and defend it will not have good consequences at all.
The other thing that I actually brought up with the Deputy Commissioner McFadden is that 9/11, we know now we're in September, and the 20-year anniversary of 9/11 just passed. And I told him a 30-year-old police officer, has been for the past 20 years, since he's 10 years old, seeing images on the media outlets, on social media, of Muslims equal terrorists. And I told him, you can say what you like. I know that police do training and they are there to protect and serve, but there is an element of unconscious bias that goes in all of us as humans, like we all have our judgments. When we see something, we have our own personal judgment of the environment around us. And I'll show you what he had to say. But do you feel like our community, because of all this, we do have that innate response that, oh, they're out to get us, oh, they hate us, oh, they discriminate against us? And how do you think we should tackle it as a community to remove that? Because I feel like the police are here to stay and our community is here to stay, basically. This is an ongoing, lifelong relationship. If it's a good and healthy relationship, it's better for everybody rather than it's always us versus them mentality.
Absolutely. Look, post 9/11, I would say for at least the first decade after, many within the community carry that mindset, and it's something that is very difficult to brush off. And to top it off also with everything that's happening overseas, which directly affects us. We all have
Yes.
loved ones, that are being affected and directly hit due to foreign policy that will affect, I guess, our own way of thinking and our own perceptions on authority. However, I would say then in the last decade, though, a lot of work has gone into reversing that. So while, yes, I get that, all these, work on, anti-terrorism laws and counter-extremism and all that sort of stuff has been very difficult on the Muslim community in particular, because we have had to bear the brunt of it all and deal with it. Now we're seeing a slight shift, not completely, and we've got a long way to go, but we're seeing a slight shift in that extremism, and the definition of it has been expanded. It's no longer just and exclusively Muslims. In fact, there are far right supremacist extremists out there that we also need to be wary and target. So if you want to stay a victim for the whole, for the entirety of your life, that's your problem. I can't help you there, right?
Yes.
What we need to start, and I tell this to my children all the time. I mean, I was born and raised here. They were born and raised here. So they're what, like, you know, at least third generation Australian almost now.
Yeah.
And I tell them, you are Australian before anything. You're Australian. You need to be proud of it. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And if you are made to feel otherwise, you step up to the task and actually negate it, and you challenge it. So we need to instill in our community, particularly our young people, that you are just as Australian. You have there's no us and them. I am Australian. That's it.
Yes.
You know, there's no two ways about it. You know, but at the same time, do police hold those perceptions? Absolutely. And that's why. And again, these were some of the questions we raised with police, in that, are your police, particularly now during a COVID climate, are they being trained and briefed daily as to how to deal with culturally and linguistically diverse communities? Are they being briefed on how it is that they're, so for example, I'll give you a perfect example. You know, you knock on the door now during the COVID climate and nobody answers immediately. Does that mean you knock the door down and you go in and
Yes.
start to arrest? No, because in these areas, there may be Muslims, women with hijabs, they need time to, so things as simple as that sometimes make a huge difference. So training and daily briefings now, particularly with police, is critical. And yes, some of them may hold these unconscious biases and racist, I guess, and discriminatory, you know, mindsets against not just Muslims, but anyone non-Anglo. But you know, we'll just have to deal with that. There's no two ways about it.
Just our community would have, you know, the fringe that believes that in terrorism, or, you know, so it's just the same. Every community would have like the people that are.
I mean, well, who are we to talk? As a Muslim community, we have our own innate, this horrible racism and discrimination between ourselves. You know, if you are not an Arab, if you are not this, if you're not that, you're different. So I am not saying that we belittle the racism and discrimination that happens on the other side, but at the same time, we need to acknowledge the discrimination, racism that we possess, and solve our internal issues before we air our laundry and start to deal with the outside.
It's about the willingness from both sides to actually want to understand what took place, rather than form a view, what I call a misinformed or an ill-informed view based on limited information. So I'm not saying that any human being is raised in a certain way. You gave the example of a 30-year-old adult today has experienced the last 20 years, and the reference to the war on terror. I see the books in your background associated with the topic. So, I think whilst there's been a lot of challenges in policing in our environment, particularly in Southwest, I go back to the comments I made earlier. The richness of our relationships have been really strengthened because we have had to come together. We've actually had to talk about what does this mean and what is our response to these types of incidents. When emotions are running high, what we're finding is the community leaders are reaching out and saying, look, this is not a good look. We're not comfortable with how this sounds, but what's your view on this? And I think it's because we've had 20 years, as the timeframe you provided, of real challenge and controversy around us about, that we've really stepped into a more cohesive, engaged conversations. And some of those conversations, even from my own experience over the years, they haven't always been pleasant. There's been some difficult challenges, but the thing that I had been encouraged with, they've always been respectful. We can agree to disagree on some points, but there's always been a respect from the community leaders and the police, looking to understand community sentiment, looking to understand the challenges that we're facing. And this is no different in the environment that we're in. And this opportunity you provided me today is exactly something that we welcome.
So as you can see, that they actually have these difficult conversations. They are up for having these conversations, and I actually as well appreciated that they do know that these things exist. So I feel like the better option for all of us is to discuss it and speak about it. And if we feel like we've been dealt with the wrong way, to just be open about it.
No, definitely, 100%. And I think just to build on what McFadden said, I think, and this is just my own personal opinion, there are 3 critical elements that we need to start endorsing and applying on both sides, both the Muslim community and police as well. Acknowledgement, so acknowledgement that, yes, there may be some people doing the right and the wrong thing. That's one. Transparency, being open about what's happening, and presenting both sides to the story. So again, if I'm a bystander or even a victim, and I only decide to present a snippet of an incident that is within a context of something broader, then that's not fair. So transparency is really important. And the last thing is accountability. There has to be accountability on both sides. So if you've done something wrong, you need to be accountable. If you've done something that's beyond your authoritative powers as well, you need to be held accountable on both sides. So those three factors, I think, are really critical in this particular climate. And I think, inshallah, platforms like this and conversations like this and our, frequent and continued dialogue between community and police is going to, not only just salvage the tampered relationship at the moment, but inshallah nurture it so that we can continue to work together. Because as you said, nobody's going anywhere. We're all here to stay, and we need to learn how it is that we're going to work with one another, inshallah.
Inshallah. Any final messages for the community other than that?
Look, I think I'd like to end on that note, those three key figures, but I think the thing that I want to acknowledge is that our community, and when I talk about our community, I'm talking Southwestern Sydney, is under immense pressure and distress at the moment. And I acknowledge that. I acknowledge the pain that each individual or family is possibly going through, whether it's financial, whether it's health crisis, whether it's lack of access to certain essential services, whatever it is. Yeah. It is extremely, it's almost like war. We are almost, if anyone's ever lived through, I haven't, my husband has, he's lived through the Gulf War, and he tells me it's almost like war, but a bit better. So I acknowledge the pain and distress that the community is experiencing. There's a lot of frustration and anxiety, but at the same time, there is a requirement that someone out there enforces the law to ensure that we have a path at least to exit from this crisis. We have to realize, and again, when we have conversations with police, we'll make it clear to them, remember, it's COVID that's the criminal, not us, yeah. Not the community, right? And they're very open and understanding with this. We're starting to get confused, all of us, even as a community. We're forgetting that COVID's the culprit here. COVID yes. is the criminal, not the police. The police are not our enemy. It's COVID that's the enemy. So we need to work together, just follow the rules, know that you have responsibilities, but by no means forfeit your rights. You absolutely have rights. And if you want to pursue justice, you have absolutely every right to and the means to. And inshallah, we'll get out of this nightmare that we're all living in.
Yeah, so I feel this myself as well. I'm Lebanese. I'm born in Lebanon. I consider myself an Australian because I've been here for 12 years. So now if you actually give me the option whether I am Lebanese or Australian, I feel like I'm more connected to this country. My children are here. Their schools are here. My friends now are here. I feel like when I go back to Lebanon, I do feel like a guest. But I've seen and I've witnessed how, let's say, the Lebanese government has dealt with COVID, and when there's no law and order and people are just left to survive basically on their own, fend for themselves. I don't feel like, I don't appreciate what the police are doing, but at the same time, it's very important to just balance it out. And if something is going, just to tell them, hey, just make sure that we are heard here and we are not stepped over or our rights are being disregarded. So I really appreciate you.
We live in a privileged country where as citizens we have the freedom to express how we feel and express our concerns, as opposed to, countries abroad where we will not even be we will not dream of being able to express.
You can just say whatever you want. No one's listening to you. No one. So I've seen that side of things, and I've studied journalism. So my whole life I've actually covered politics and news about politics, and I've seen how things run. And I feel like here the mayors did a meeting with the premier. I don't follow a certain party, but I just saw that the mayors voiced their concerns about the curfew and how it doesn't do anything. And then the next day it was lifted. I feel like there is someone that is hearing our concerns if it is dealt, like you said, in an organized and by law, and you actually come and voice your opinion in the right manner. And I really want to thank you for joining me and thank the police department, New South Wales Police, for actually coming and giving us their side of the story. And I hope like this actually clears things up for you guys. Jazakumullah khair for joining us. And inshallah, Majlis is going to be airing every Tuesday. You can subscribe to it on all podcast platforms, and you can check it out as well on our website. It's going to be all in the link down below. So thank you very much for joining us, and Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This podcast is brought to you by Penny Appeal Australia.